it's those things that it's just different things. It's not someone popping in your office. It's a dog barking or the doorbell going. So it's no worries.
Yeah. Great.
Right. So I'll do your intro and then I'll welcome you. Okay. So Allister Lewis, the founder of Automated Data-Driven Design, ADDD for short, is a specialist in construction technology software for the AEC industry. With a passion for the use of digital tools, Allister fully understands the scale and scope these tools bring and the opportunity to build a better, faster, and more profitable industry. Supporting AEC companies by performing digital consultancy services such as searching, reviewing, reporting, and implementation. Allister is currently working on the ADDD marketplace, which will be the central resource for the AEC context software in the future. The vision for this is to provide seamless access to all context software through a digital marketplace. We'll get into that a little bit later. Allister, welcome to the podcast. And did I miss anything from that intro?
No, that's amazing. That's actually amazing that you got all of that in there. I'm not sure where you got all that from, but it's really good.
Yeah, I scout around and I have a look to see who's coming on and do a bit of research. But yeah, I can't wait to start chatting, particularly this very first part, which I'm just going to dive straight into. Okay, very simply, could you explain what automated data-driven design (ADDD) is, why it's crucial for the future of construction, but more importantly, couldn't you have called it something simpler to say?
Yeah, really good point. So I generally call it just add,
Yeah,
but
okay,
it has
cool.
got 3 Ds in it, and I'm hoping it's memorable more than anything, so that people are like, oh, when I'm looking for software or new technology, I can go to the ad marketplace. So hopefully that will stick, but we'll see. The reason it came about is I did a BIM Masters in 2015 to 2017, and that course was great because obviously it dealt with BIM and all the detail around BIM and stuff, but it also dealt with a lot of the wider construction industry problems and issues and things like inefficiency, productivity, and that kind of wider sort of construction industry problems with research and development. And I originally called it Association of Data-Driven Design. And then when I came to register it as a company, they said, you can't use that. You're not allowed to use associations. So I changed it to automated, which actually fits really well with the whole approach. But my experience has been, my background is as an architect moving into BIM management and then into technology in quite a detailed way. What followed was kind of, an exploration of data-driven design as part of my thesis at my master's, but also I started collecting software. So whenever I saw a new piece of software out there, I was like, oh, I'll put that into a database. And I think quite a few BIM managers and people have these sort of databases of software, but mine, I think, is the most thorough and comprehensive one because it's reached 900 different bits of software now for the architecture, engineering, and construction industry, and it's growing every day. It's just the expansion of it is critical because I think it was 500 last year, so it's nearly doubled in size. And basically what I've thought was, well, we've got all this software, it's fine that it's in a private database for me. So I work with clients to find the right solutions for them, leveraging that database. But I was like, I want to create an environment where people can find all these software quickly and easily. And that's where the marketplace came from. So I read a book called Platform Revolution, which is in the background here, just on my shelf. And that talks about how all these really big companies like Amazon and Airbnb and Uber basically are platforms. They don't necessarily own a lot of stuff, but they allow access to a lot of things. And I've decided to create a platform for what is quite a niche area, which is construction technology software. The term construction technology is not limited to that, because you've got prop tech, which is actually quite big and quite mature in a way as well, and there's design tech as well. But essentially, software and tools for the architecture, engineering, construction, and operations industry. And that's why it exists. It's allowed people to find that in a sort of simple way, basically, which, we've all got really busy lives doing our day-to-day jobs. I've just made my job the job of actually keeping hold of all of this stuff and allowing people to find it quickly and easily. So that is the approach. It's trying to help people, to find the right tools to help their day-to-day jobs.
That's fantastic. It very much sounds. I love I love a good podcast, and that's partly why I do this one. And there's just one that's come to an end called the Marketing Book Podcast by a guy called Douglas Burdett in America, and it sounds quite similar to what he did or does in a way. He's just retired, that's why it's finished. I think he did 500 episodes, but he started it, and I think he read a few books and he thought, there's no podcast on marketing books, so I'll start one. And he decided to do one a week, and then he realized after about 4 or 5 episodes, oh yeah, I'm gonna have to read a marketing book every single week here. And he did. I mean, hats off to him. I couldn't do that. And it's one of my favorite podcasts. And I know Douglas, and he's a superstar. My point being that he started collecting marketing books and got people to sign them as they came on the podcast and stuff like that. It sounds very similar, but obviously you've scaled that up and moved into the kind of the software rather than something physical.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think it's a hugely exciting
Brilliant.
time.
Okay, right.
That's the thing.
Yeah, that and that's the thing, and you're at the front end of it. You see the development and the changes, which must be, you're not just sitting at the sidelines. You're offering a very valuable service and almost opening it up to the industry from a wider perspective for people that know and understand tech, for people that are kind of in the middle, and those that don't. It's all there and readily available.
Yes, I absolutely agree, and I think it's about the different tiers within the industry. So you've got people who, when you are a super big company and you've got all those resources in house, then you can, spend time and money on researching and making sure you're up to date with them. But for those kind of medium, small practices, which essentially are doing, a lot of work, they don't have time to explore these options. That's partly, kind of where I'm seeing myself sitting, is actually supporting them a lot more and saying, look, okay, you don't have an in-house BIM manager or, IT manager or CAD manager or expert in these areas, and to say to them, use me, I can do that work for you, or use the resources that we've got on the website.
And that's that. This is seamless, utterly seamless, like this podcast is. But that leads me nicely onto a slightly different topic, and getting into more your consultancy work and picking your brain here. As we know, automating repetitive tasks in construction can significantly improve productivity and reduce human error. And understanding when and how to automate tasks is key to maximizing these benefits, enabling construction projects to become completed faster with a higher quality. But only if the solution is right for the task. So that's kind of where you sort of come in. What are some practical ways we can make sure we're automating for the right reasons, or we're providing software or using software for the right reasons? And how do we determine what's right and when to do it? Loads to go out there, so let's that's simple.
Yeah. Okay. So it's interesting. So one of the things I'm doing with clients at the moment is a workshop session, and that is very much about, from the outset, developing a vision. What do they want to try and achieve? What does that look like? Is it all about AI? Have they just heard about AI and they just want to try and implement it because everyone else is, or do they have a proper use case for it? In that workshop session as well, we do some work around their existing, what we call tech stack, but basically the software solutions they have in their current day-to-day working, and identify gaps or where they'd like to make connections between them. And that covers all of the RIBA work stages from, RIBA stage 1, it can be 0, I suppose, 0 to 5, I suppose, but typically 1 to 4 for architects anyway. And the aim behind that is to say, okay, you've got tools in this area. You might be quite mature in, BIM authoring software and modeling software and rendering, but there are some gaps in that to do with sustainability, data management, clash detection. So that's I find it a really good session that kind of goes, okay, so we can see where our gaps are, which one of these are we do we think really important, and which ones of these could we leave a bit later on in our workflow, to a bit, in terms of timeline. We build a roadmap that kind of goes, this is where we start, so let's look at these tools first, and then focus on other ones later on. In addition to that, I've been doing some work with architects to do with BIM gap analysis, to kind of go, where are you on your BIM journey? Because in terms of processes and how they work, that's really important. And as I say, kind of small, medium-sized practices may not have had to do BIM yet, or they haven't got clients that require it. So we could do a bit of work there, which is very basically just updates their existing way of working. Say, look, we've got a process for checking, reviewing, approving documents before they go out, and saving information in a structured format with a structured naming and numbering. So those are sort of some of the kind of the baseline things that are worth doing. And then following on from that, it's about having those conversations and say, okay, so what are you trying to achieve? And then working out how to do that. And the way I kind of view it is that you've got different tiers to that. So upfront, the simplest and easiest way to do it is find a piece of software that does whatever they want it to do. So if it is, managing COBie data or clash detection, or visualizing data on a dashboard, there may be proprietary software that does that for them, which is software as a service. It's already built, it's there, they can adopt it, bring it into their workflows, and that's great. There may be things which they say, okay, well, we've got more of a bespoke type thing where we're looking at, actually, we've got a workflow that goes from this point, a design exercise, to getting an output, whatever that may be. And at that point, you're like, okay, we might need to connect together proprietary software. So it may be about developing a bespoke tool which says, we're going to take this software, which is, let's say, it's a modeling software, but get it into this other software, which is their BIM authoring tool. So an example of that is generative design. There's a lot of generative design tools out there for feasibility, but what we want to do is get that output in terms of massing and the data that's attached to it into their authoring software, whether it's Revit or ArchiCAD or whatever it might be, Rhino. And at that point, you're going to the next tier, where you're like, okay, we're going to have to build an integration, and someone's going to have to, do some coding, or it may be some visual scripting or something like that to connect them together. And then the next level is actually, okay, there's nothing on the market that does what we want to do. What we want is a very bespoke solution. And at that point, you're into paying for someone to build something for you from scratch. And that's obviously a much more expensive thing. And an example of that is we did a proposal for a client who really wanted to automate the bidding process. So they wanted to say, okay, we get all of our fee benchmarking documentation. We want to use that against a project and say, is this project viable? And then also to then build a proposal letter saying, we're going to do these services, landscape, interiors, architecture services, for example. And then also write what they called a bid narrative, because they had a very singular style of how they write bids. We could take all of their previous bids from the last 20 years, 30 years, put that into a large language model, and use AI to then write out that bit of bid narrative for them, and it would pick up on their style. So we haven't actually progressed with that project, but I worked with an AI expert on this, and we've built out essentially the plan for how we would do it. But that is obviously much more expensive than if you just purchased a proprietary piece of software. But behind all of this is about having a good understanding of what the needs are, and then saying, okay, how do we approach that in a way which is, I'm going to say, logical, because if they've got a logic, like we want to do 1, 2, 3, 4, then you can code that, or you can build software for it, or you can find software for it. So having that structure in place really helps, I think, clients to understand what they want and where they want to get to. Does that all make sense? I'm hoping I answered all your question there.
No, you have absolutely really thorough and interesting, the process going through, particularly the different stages, or you're going from basic to purely bespoke, which is always good to see. There's different levels at this moment in time. Are you getting a particular request? Because I think you started initially by talking about AI, and that's the thing that comes up with it with any conversation you have with anybody at the moment.
Yeah.
Is that kind of the gateway at the moment, or is it more basic than that? Are we talking people are coming to you and talking about BIM or just software in general?
Truthfully, it can be anything. So, like I
Mm,
say, at one end of the scale, architects who want to literally just upskill their BIM knowledge and have better processes and practices in place to make sure that when they win that next big housing project that requires BIM, requirements such as ISO 19650, they're ready and they've got
mm,
folder structures, naming and numbering. A lot of it's it's fairly simple, but obviously it's not something that small practices have in place from the outset.
yeah.
So that could be one part of it, is looking at that scale of things. And then I think for kind of more medium to larger size practices, which may have a lot of those things in place, they're looking at efficiencies across stage 4, particularly where we know that detailed design and create all that documentation takes an awful long time. They're looking at ways of trying to um, automate that a bit more with
Hmm.
tools like Swap, maybe, which is a kind of a tool for automating drawing production, and Schema as well, which takes you from very early stage feasibility studies into a Revit model and then documentation creation quite quickly as well. So I think that's where I kind of break it into two sides. You've got, one is the sort of design side, which is like tools that help you with design, and that might be AI generating imagery, rendering, software which is generative design. You think tools which are like kind of very much focused on that design
Mm.
output and augment that process. And then you've got what I call kind of mundane tasks, which are like automating the really boring stuff we do over and over again. Stuff like detailing, where we could have a much better library of tools to make that quicker. So that's kind of how I split it at the moment. It's obviously not universally true, but
Mm.
I think a lot of clients are kind of struggling with those two aspects at the moment.
Yeah, I always find it that it's always the tech and the software that does the boring stuff, but no one really wants to talk about that. They want the nice and
Yeah.
shiny stuff, which is
Yeah.
never the good place to start. So let's move it forward in terms of implement it. We've implemented software. We've got the right software. It's in place. A study by Autodesk and FMI Consulting discovered that bad data may have caused about $1.8 trillion in losses worldwide back in 2020. That's just kind of universally. Data-driven decision making is transforming the construction industry, as we know and as we're talking about, but providing actionable insights that lead to better outcomes can be trickier than just implementing software. It's such a simple statement to say that implement software and we'll get actionable insights. But doing that is open to a lot of interpretation in terms of what data, its size, the scale, the scope, etc., with most data being beyond processing power of human capabilities, and that's why we use the software. So, how do we do it? How do we take something that is insurmountable for a human to look at this information and make valid decisions from it? How do we take it and start to utilize it to our advantage?
God, that's a tough one, isn't it?
So, basically, how are we making valid decisions from what we're
Mm,
implementing?
yeah. I mean, you're right. Yeah, there's so much data. Yeah, there's so much data, but we don't leverage it very well. I think that's
Mm,
one key thing. And architects in particular have loads of data on their previous designs. They probably have hundreds of designs that they produce over 10, 15, 20 years, and all of that design information is not leveraged at all.
mhm,
Actually, it's essentially data, but it's plans for buildings, plan for layouts for flat types and houses, and we've got loads of information in that respect which we could use a lot better. And equally, there's a lot of data in terms of um, there's sort of big data type aspects about how we work and what we do, and we could leverage, we could explore that data a lot more. Whether it's
mm,
things like resourcing, timesheets, time spent on projects, time spent doing certain activities. There's loads of data there which we could be uh, exploring, trying to understand. So, I mean, a couple of years ago, I did a data science boot camp, and that was really interesting from the point of view of just saying, okay, you've got massive amounts of data. How do you explore that in more detail? And they gave you, it was basically a data analyst tools to actually kind of look at that and go, actually, this is how we split the data down. This is how we clean it up. This is how we make it usable. And probably in an ideal world, we'd all have a data analyst who would just go through all of our own data on projects or internally in our offices and clean it all up and make it presentable in a way where you go, oh, we can see how much time we spend on stage 4 information, or how much time we spend emailing people, or what's the volume of time spent on certain activities. That's obviously not within everyone's grasp, unfortunately. So that's where kind of software tools could provide some of that. But then equally on the other side of it, where you say, okay, you've got all of this design information, how do we leverage it? And that's where AI essentially would start to help with that. So there's a piece of software which is being developed at the moment called Howie, HOWIE. And that is the premise that they have for that is to say, look, you've got all of this drawn PDF data, use an AI tool to leverage that and say, I need to find details for, a brick coping detail or a roof detail, or I want to find plans for residential buildings for 1 bed or 2 bed or 3 bed flats. And how we are trying to build a tool which basically goes, well, we've looked through all of your data. Here's 3 or 4 or 5 projects you've done before. You can then use that to then inform your future decisions. So, plenty of practices have a turnover of people that go in and out, over a period of time. But this tool should enable you to not lose that information when someone leaves. If you go, oh, we've still got access to all that data. It's theirs. They own it. That practice, and tools like that can really help with it. So that's where I see those sort of tools really helping us in the future, is to see that data and probably interrogate how inefficient we are as professionals. And we're all guilty of it, and we know that there's certain things we like to do, like as an architect. I like drawing. I like going over and over and over details and drawing stuff. But the reality is, it's not particularly efficient. And if we could shorten that process, it would be quite good. Another example is, I met with a company last week called they're called D.to or D2. I think it means design together.
Okay.
And they've basically built a Revit plugin that captures your library of details. So when you want to start detailing something, you can refer back to your previous library or your standard details and start to use that to inform your process. So it's essentially an example of data being leveraged to make your process of detailing faster and more efficient. And it looks really good. It looks really powerful and really helpful. And I don't think it's taken too much hold in the UK yet, because they're focusing on the US market, but could definitely see how practices, if they're doing very similar work over and over again, they could say, well, we know what a brickwork detail looks like. We know what, cladding looks like. We have a typical way of doing this. Capture that detail, put it into a library, and make that really accessible. So I think the answer to your question is, we need to capture the data we have, and use it as we move forward.
Do you think that's part of the problem, that data that we currently have is messy in general, and to kind of see where you can go from, if you are under practice or any type of organization, you've got all this information on servers, in software, or God forbid, in filing cabinets. You've got it all. But how do we go from that to something like you just said? Oh, find me this detailing, and it's done. Do you think part of the problem is almost that feels like it's dark magic kind of thing?
Yeah, there's a risk of that, isn't there? I suppose in terms of being able to find technology like that helps. That's, I suppose, where I'm trying to position myself to say, look, if you've got a challenge, talk to me. I can find a solution or a set of solutions which may suit you with that. And they may not always be like about automating things. It might be something super simple to actually make that job easier. But equally, I think, it's about I suppose looking at all of that data and saying, actually, what of this do we really want to capture, and what is important and what's useful, and trying to sift out the bits which aren't necessarily quite so useful. Like I say, yeah, engineers seem to be very good at this, where they're like, we've got typical details. It's a manhole detail, and they've got typical details for all these different elements. They seem to be very, very much more organized in a way on that sort of thing. And it would be good, particularly for architects, to get to that position where they're like, actually, we know we've got standard details.
Mm.
I'm not scared of standardizing, because it's okay. It's okay to standardize or have a standard detail which you can then amend for that particular project. We do design from bespoke probably far too often, when we could actually leverage stuff we've done before. And that's not a bad thing.
Hmm.
And that would lead you into more ideas about, well, what about offsite construction? What about modern methods of construction and design for
Mm.
manufacture and assembly? If you're starting to standardize a bit of essentially the boring stuff, internal details or internal, wall constructions and things, and it's just more about the cladding, that's um, the interesting bit maybe, or the more kind of challenging design exercise. If we can standardize the boring stuff, you can then start saying, well, actually, we could off-site manufacture this, which would make it more efficient, which means we're going to get to site faster, we can be cheaper, or the quality will be higher because we're not having to build it with wet trades on site. I think that's kind of the workflow, isn't it? So that's, if we
Hmm.
can start to be better, we can then start to take advantage of MMC, and offsite manufacture, which we know we need to build the number of homes we need in the next 5 years, which I think has been 1.5 million homes I think we need to build. And that's going to be really tough.
Yeah.
So some level of standardization is going to be needed, but we don't need to lose the design authorship of that, or designing in a bespoke and locally, I'm going to say acceptable, but integrate into its local environment in an appropriate way.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's just the internal elements of many buildings are very similar, and we could just say, let's just keep using the same stuff. And then we spend the time on the really exciting stuff, which is designing the facade, the form of the building, the light, the delight, the niceness of that space.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Uh, Brings me nicely on to looking at um, the innovative software, or just software in general, that you've got this database of software. It's obviously pushing boundaries of what's possible, and for a lot of people, in particularly in construction, it's almost a leap into the unknown using some of this. Um, but having said that, we can't stop progress, and we shouldn't. You encounter numerous pieces of software and tools that are changing the landscape, and they can have a significant impact on the industry or just an organization in isolation. Do you have a particular favorite, or one that's just truly impressed you, blown you away? I'm not asking you to, um, if you got any affiliations, move them aside. But you know, but is there one or a few, or in different parts of the industry, that are just like, this is phenomenal?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Like I say, I've got get introduced to so many different bits of
Mm,
software, and in some ways it's hard to keep track of it all because they all kind of merge a bit. Uh, I think. Well, I'm following off the last comment about modern methods of construction, and I've got to declare an interest here. I used to work for this company until last year, but Cope, that's KOPE, have produced a piece of software which is about automating the production of the documentation and the model information for offsite construction. And I think it is really powerful. I mean, I've obviously seen it in a lot of detail how it works, but
mm,
essentially they take an IFC model and they can then apply products to that model. And it's amazing. Like, the team behind it is amazing. They really are. And genuinely, I think that is, a really valuable software for the future,
mhm,
because of the way that it speeds up that whole process, and it's done by some incredibly intelligent people, which is really great. So I think that's a really good one. I'm trying to think now. I've obviously mentioned DTO. I think that's a really good one in terms of detailing for architects. I think that's great. There's another piece of software which is called Satori, Satori, and they've built a really amazing piece of software which uh, essentially allows you to kind of codify design standards. So, for example, if you're working for a hotel chain and you do a number of hotels for them, they'll have a design standard for how their hotels are designed and what they look
Mm.
like. And they've built essentially a data management tool which allows you to um, go into a lot of granular detail about how all of those spaces should look, what should be in them, the materials, the technology that's in them. And it's amazing. It's really amazing in terms of how that works. And at a very simple level, architects could really benefit from that for room data sheets because I haven't done it for a while now, and I'm sure it's done differently now, but yeah, let me know if not. But typically it used to be a Word document or an Excel sheet, and it would be, this is our room data sheet, and it had all the stuff on it, and it was prone to error, and didn't get updated, and it was a very manual process and very boring. And this platform Satori, they've got a tool which is like, actually no, this makes it nice, and it's consistent, and it works across projects. So if you're doing, again, residential projects for the same client, you say, what are your design standards? We'll build it into here, and then that can be managed throughout the whole project. And then post completion as well, it manages the data, so you're getting into the idea of digital twins and how the building's managed longer term, and what that looks like. So I think that's for architects really
Cool.
valuable. Yeah, I could keep going on, but
Yeah, yeah.
what I would say is if a plug here is, like, if you go to the ad marketplace, you'll be able to find tools and software on there which start to help you with this. There's over 50 categories on there, and the idea is to allow people to say, I'm looking for this solution, and those categories allow people to search for that software quickly and easily. So yeah, there's a quick plug for you there for me for that. But that's essentially what the aim of that longer term is going to be.
Nice one. And that's the soundbite for the podcast done.
That's
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Okay. Final topic then. I want to come full circle and come back to yourself in a way. And in this evolving field, construction technology, I'm talking about, continuous learning is essential for staying ahead of new technology, how to implement it, what it can do, and also what's coming up. And your passion for lifelong learning highlights the importance of this actual approach. So, how has your dedication to learning and understanding the tech and this continuation, like you said, 900 odd pieces of software and growing, influenced your approach to construction technology and developing ad?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I always liked doing courses, and yeah, continual study. So obviously, in terms of my background, I did a degree, then I did what we called a diploma. It's called a master's now for those
Mhm.
students that do that level. Then I did obviously the part three course. So in like a 9 year or 10 year period, 7 years of those were spent studying. And then I did a master's in BIM afterwards, and that was a really good way of getting into the kind of the much more kind of specific area of the wider technology issues, and understanding them much better, and in particular technology. And as I said, I did a boot camp, data science boot camp as well. I think um, for me, it's about the continual learning is really important, and
Mm.
there are lots of courses which are coming out um, which help with that. So LinkedIn is a really good place to start with people, and I'm going to name check Stepan Milkulic, who's based in Denmark. He's Croatian by background, but his course AI in AEC is a really great place to start if you want to find out more
Cool.
about that. There are lots of resources online for courses. So there's the Architect Network, which is run by Oliver Thomas. That's a really good place to go as well. They've got loads of course on computation and rendering, and BIM and things like that, which is really good. So I would point people in that direction. But we're in a world where actually, if you want to learn something now, you can go on YouTube and there's loads of content on there. And that's the massive advantage we have now over 20 years ago, where if you wanted to learn something, it was, well, you've got to go to a university, or you have to learn it yourself somehow, basically. Whereas now, YouTube and Udemy and those sort of online courses, you can buy a course for 20-30 pounds and you've got a complete insight into a piece of software. So it's looking for those resources very much. And then conferences, there's a lot of conferences, I know there are, but they are a really good way into this, not only to develop your own learning and understanding, but also to network and find people who are similar and want to find out the same things as you and have the same challenges. And I've been to a lot of different conferences over time. I really like Digital Construction Week because it's super broad in terms of digital technology, and all the talks there are really good. There's the the AEC magazine has got their event each year, which is Next Build, which this year was excellent, I thought, because it was really focused on that side of things. And then the other thing I'm going to mention is actually Women in BIM, because I'm a mentor on Women in BIM at the moment. It's my first year of doing it. And I'm helping someone with their kind of career progression and where they want to go. And that, that mentorship approach, I think is hopefully for them really helpful. I'll have to find out at the end of it. But I think, there's lots of people who've got loads of great skills and they want to feed it back to the rest of the industry. And the Women in BIM initiative with mentoring there is really valuable. And there are some amazing experts on there, not me, but there are some really other people who are really excellent. So if you're looking to go from an architect interested in technology, or someone, a technologist or a technician, or anyone who might be thinking about going to BIM, that Women in BIM program is probably a really excellent place to start to help you to grow and develop and meet other people like yourself.
Fantastic. That's great advice, and some really good tips there. Loads of courses to check out and places to start. And I think that's a great place to end. Allister, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Thanks for sharing all your knowledge and information. It's been invaluable for me, and I know for the listeners as well. So absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, really appreciate it. It's been really good. Yeah, really great. Thank you. Love to do it again in a little time and say how things have developed.
Well, let's get to 1,800 pieces of software and then get you back on.
Okay, sounds good.